Hello and welcome to our Migration, Borderlands, and Social Boundaries and Antiquities lecture series. I'd like to begin by reading a statement from the Bade Museum. My name is Brooke Norton. I'm the curator of the Bade Museum of Biblical Archaeology. We would like to begin by acknowledging that Berkeley, California is on the territory of the Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo Ohlone. We respect the land and the people who have stewarded it throughout many generations, and we honor their elders and their ancestors. We are living in a moment that warrants deep reflection on our past and present. As a museum dedicated to advancing knowledge of the archaeology and history of the ancient Levant, the Bade Museum welcomes scholarly discussions across boundaries of nationality, religion, gender, and other aspects of identity. We particularly welcome scholars who are engaging with risky topics in today's fraught political landscape and whose scholarship bridges past and present through study of issues like migration, borderlands, and social boundaries. Thank you for joining us. I would now like to invite my colleague and the director of the Bade Museum, Dr. Erin Brody, to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you very much, Brooke. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Sarit Paz, who is a Southern Levantine archaeologist. She earned her PhD in archaeology from Tel Aviv University in 2011, was a postdoctoral researcher at the Martin Buber Society of Fellows from 2011 to 2015, and held the Golda Meir Fellowship from 2015 to 16 at the Hebrew University. She was a teaching fellow in the Unit of Culture Research at the Porter School of Cultural Studies at Tel Aviv University between 2015 to 2022, and in the Institute of Archaeology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem from 2011 to 2016. Currently, she is a Cultrice della Materia subject expert at Ca' Foscari University in Venice, Italy. I hope my pronunciation was not too bad. She has been a co-director of excavations at Beit Yerach, or Kirbet Kerek in Israel, together with Professor Rafi Greenberg since 2007, and heads the research and publication project of Kfach, this one I'm going to butcher. Thank you, in Georgia, thank you, since 2014. Her research is focused on early Bronze Age societies in the Levant and the South Caucasus, early urbanism, houses and households, and the identification of migration and diaspora in the archaeological record. Her talk today is entitled Caucasus Connections, Kura-Araxes Migration and Diaspora in the Third Millennium BCE, a View from the Southern Levant. Professor Paz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you all for having me. I'll share my presentation and let the show begin. Let's see. Okay, I think this is working properly. Perfect.
Great.
Okay, so let me start by saying I'm very happy to be part of this series. I know you heard several lectures, different views and approaches and case studies about migration. And this one, I think you'll find slightly different maybe. And our starting point is Tel Beit Yerach or Killebrew Kerek in the southern Levant. I'm just going to go briefly through the order of things as I'm going to progress in the lecture. So I'm going to start with the brief introductions on Tel Beit Yerach, on Killebrew Kerek ware, which is the pottery identified in this site and the clue that led to this entire study of migration in relation to the Kura-Araxes cultural complex. We will talk about how this connection came about between the Southern Levant and the South Caucasus and different theories of migration, different approaches, and then a little bit on the study that we have been pursuing in the past 15, 20 years about the migration origins, roots, and the way of living of these people in the far ends of their diaspora. And finally, focus on the material culture and cultural practices and social practices of migrants at Tel Beit Yerach, to show you how we consolidated this case study. So these are the things I'm going to go through. And let's start by talking a little bit about Tel Beit Yerach, which was considered already by William Foxwell Albright as the most important early Bronze Age site in the region. And it is located in northern Israel, on the south shore of the Sea of Galilee, Lake Kinneret, right on the egress of the Jordan River from the Sea of Galilee. Here you can see to the right, Sea of Galilee on the right side and the Jordan River outlet, and the entire peninsula that you see here is actually Tel Beit Yerach, 30 hectares of early Bronze Age, many different levels. The site has been excavated by about 15 different expeditions since the early 1930s and to the present. And our expedition, headed by Rafi Greenberg and then myself, started working on the study of Tel Beit Yerach in 2001, and we started excavation in 2003 until recently, and we still work on publishing all of the material. The site actually encompasses the entire time span of the early Bronze Age of the Southern Levant, starting from the mid-4th millennium to mid-3rd millennium BC. And it sees the entire transformation from a village to the earliest cities of the late 4th millennium, and also the migration and settlement of foreign people from the South Caucasus in this area in the early Bronze III, which will be the focus of our talk today, around slightly after 2900 to 2500 BC. The starting point of our talk or of our study is Khirbet Karakwer, or Klei Beit Yerach in Hebrew, named after the site of Tel Beit Yerach, Khirbet Karak in Arabic. And this is the type site of this kind of pottery. These are beautiful red and black burnished vessels, handmade, decorated sometimes, and they are very different from anything else that we know in the area during the early Bronze Age. At the same time, they're also very similar to things that we know from the South Caucasus at that point in time, which started raising the interest of scholars already in the 1950s and 60s. Here you see in the bottom picture some Khirbet Karak vessels from Tel Beit Yerach, and on the upper photos you see some vessels from Armenia and Georgia that are very, very similar. And as I said, this caught the attention of some scholars already in the 1950s and 60s. Most importantly, I will mention Ruth Amiran, who wrote about the connections between Anatolia and the Levant in this period. And later on, as you see in her 1965 article, she also went as far as Yanik Tepe in Iran, Shengavit in Armenia, and Khirbet Karakwer in Israel, to show that there should be a connection. We should take note of that. Same goes for Charles Burney. And when we look at the dispersal map of sites where we find this type of pottery, these wares, you see that they're quite widespread. We find these early Caucasian or Kura-Araxes wares from the South Caucasus, a little bit to the north, down to the Iranian plateau on one hand, and to Anatolia, Syria, the Amuk Valley, and down to the southern Levant on the other hand. So this is a very widespread area, and this pottery that we call here Khirbet Kerak, where after Tel Beit Yerach or Khirbet Kerak, is clearly an alien ceramic tradition in the southern Levant, and it does show great affinities to cultures in Eastern Anatolia and the Caucasus. Does that mean immediately migration? You know that long time ago, people always connected ceramic styles to groups of people, to cultural identity, but that does not necessarily mean that this is the case. There could be other forms of cultural diffusion or transfer, stylistic reasons or imitations. There can also be trade. So there has been a big debate going on for many years around these ceramic groups. And as Pierre de Mirochegi stated in 2000, pottery in its own cannot stand for a cultural community, for an entire migrating community. So we should probably look for other clues as well. So it kind of stayed an open debate, but at the same time, there has been one very comprehensive work conducted by Antonio Sagona, the late Antonio Sagona, as part of his PhD. And to date, this is the most comprehensive work that we have on Kura-Araxes, Khirbet Kerak wares. And he actually studied material from the entire dispersal area of these wares and did a wonderful, very thorough comparative study. The debate still goes as does it stand for migration, or should we look for other explanations for the widespread of this pottery? And you probably already heard the pots and people paradigm and discussion. And while before people used to equate material culture with cultural identity immediately, for many years, the understanding was, or the point of view was that pots do not represent directly people. Although, in some cases, like our case, they actually might. And when we look at the shift of, trends of migration in archaeology, we might find some understanding of it, because we know that migration, it's something that happens in our world today a lot, but it happened also in the past. And in early archaeology, people always sought for diffusion or movement of people or migration as explanation for cultural change. The reaction to that later on in the mid-20th century was rejecting migration altogether as a legitimate explanation for cultural changes and seeking for internal explanations and changes in social dynamics. And only in the 1980s, actually, migration returned as an acceptable explanation for changes, as agents of cultural changes. As David Anthony wrote, we should not spill the baby with the bathwater. I mean, not in all cases migration be the explanation, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. So we're starting to talk about migration again. And that means that we can start looking at Khirbet Kerak ware again, maybe with a fresh view. I would say also that this return of migration in archaeology was not isolated from what happened in other disciplines in the social sciences and humanities, and it became part of the wider interdisciplinary field of migration studies, which I think benefits a lot from this interdisciplinary exchange. We definitely get a lot from anthropology, from sociology, etc. The Kura-Araxes cultural complex is one of the most durable and widespread traditions in the ancient Near East and the Caucasus. It lasts a millennium, from the mid-4th to the from the mid-5th to the mid-4th millennium, and mid-4th to the mid-3rd millennium, sorry. And it is spread, as I said, from its core area in the South Caucasus to a very, very wide area. So the core area, the homeland of Kura-Araxes, is the area of modern-day Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, slightly northeastern Turkey. This is the red spot that you see on the left side. And it is located between the rivers Kura and Araxes, hence the name Kura-Araxes, but it's also known by different other different names like red and black burnished ware, Karazware, Yannikware, etc., or early Transcaucasian in some cases. Then at some point around 2900 BC, it starts to expand beyond the core area, and it gets to the northern Caucasus as well, down south, as I said before, to the Iranian plateau, and on the other side to Anatolia, to the Amuk Valley, and just jumping over Lebanon, which I will mention later, down to the southern Levant, mainly in Israel and in the Palestinian Authority, and some in the other side of the Jordan River, in the Kingdom of Jordan. So Tel Bet Yerach is down south here in the southernmost location of this wares. And the other side I studied, Batschelebi, that Aaron mentioned before, is located in the Kura Valley, in the core area of the Kura-Araxes. And basically my study started at Tel Bet Yerach, but following the footsteps of these migrants that came, I went back to the homeland and tried to study their culture in the homeland and try to see what is different, what is the same. Basically, they did what they did, but the other way around. In the very early stages, the core area was quite isolated, but by the end of the Kura-Araxes I period, 2900, it is spread throughout the South Caucasus. To the north, it is neighboring the Maikop culture. To the south, the neighbor is the Uruk phenomena, the Uruk expansion, a Mesopotamian colonial endeavor that spread to these areas in the 4th and early 3rd millennium. And only after the retraction, the collapse of this Uruk expansion, it is that the Kura-Araxes people actually spread to further to the south, to Iran and to the Levant on both ends. In their homeland, we talk about something new that appears in the mid-4th millennium. We're talking new pottery, new settlement types, new houses. And gradually it is becoming a consolidated cultural repertoire of people who shared identity. But although they share many things, there are also some differences, and the diversity is mostly regional because we are talking about people that occupy many different niches. So it can be very high mountains, it can be valleys, it can be more arid places, or more wet and green places. So of course there are some local adaptations and variations within this very, very homogeneous phenomena. The other thing is that not only they share a lot of things among themselves, but they also differ a lot from the neighboring cultures that I mentioned before, the Maikop to the north and the Uruk from the south. So Kura-Araxes people live mainly in small agricultural villages. There are people who herd their cattle and sheep and goat around. There are some people that might practice seasonal mobility or mobility following their herds, vertical mobility, but for the most part, they are agropastoral people who live year-round in their villages. And what we see in these villages is that there is no evidence for social or economic differentiation, and these communities have no hierarchy. They're basically egalitarian communities based on kinship ties. They also present a very strong aversion and rejection of hierarchy and of centralization, which characterize the neighboring entities, the Maikop and the Uruk. And Adam Smith called this society against the state. So basically, they create a world of their own that has no clear center, has no hierarchy, and that also brought up the debate of where and how the Kura-Araxes culture emerged. So you will maybe sometimes hear that the earliest Kura-Araxes settlement was found in Azerbaijan, or it started in Armenia, or in northeastern Turkey. But I actually suggest to look at it in a slightly different way. Since we don't see a clear center, since we don't see something that starts clearly in one place and spreads in the core area, but we see something that starts to appear and consolidate in different places in this region at the same time, I suggest that maybe rather than look at it as a tree that grows and then splits and spreads, we will take a more rhizomatic view of things, a relational approach that looks at Kura-Araxes communities and cultural complex as a heterogeneous assemblage that is in a continuous process of becoming and changing. It emerges in different places. It is an ever becoming process of negotiation, of things coming together and falling apart. And we might think of it a little bit like maybe the flight of the starlings that you see here. So it's like a shift, a shape-shifting cloud of birds that comes together or spreads and disperses. And when you look at it, you never know who is leading, how it started, but you see a lot of different individuals working together to create this ever-changing greater whole. And in the case of Kura-Araxes communities or communities in general, we don't talk just about human individuals that work together in a communal action to create something bigger, but we talk about an assemblage of people and places and animals and plants and material things and ideas and practices. So a very heterogeneous assemblage of many different things that come together to create this whole, this community, this cultural complex or identity. At some point, as I said, around 2900 BC, people from the Kura-Araxes core area start to spread to a much wider area throughout the ancient Near East and the Caucasus. And then we should ask ourselves why. And the question is, we don't know. What we do know is that these people did not suffer, or the region did not suffer any crisis, no tensions at this point. Actually, at this point of time was great environmental conditions, and this place flourished. We have lots and lots of settlements in the South Caucasus, but at the same time, people start to move away. And for that reason, I suggest that maybe we should look at migration more as a social practice that that was intended to help people find a way to move on with their lives. If you live in a very egalitarian community and there is no way up, and maybe there is not enough land for everybody in the small village that you live in, then at some point you might take your wife and kids and move like 2-3 kilometers away and start your own village. And you know, take your a try of making you know, your opportunities in a different place, because there is no way up, so you can only move around horizontally. And then if you keep moving around, then eventually people probably started moving around and spreading outside this region. And as I said, at this time, when the Uruk expansion retracted, there is no conflict and no confrontation with strong political entities around, so they can just move to wherever they can enter and settle freely without any problems. So they move around, and we are not talking tens of thousands of people, maybe a few hundreds to each direction, maybe a few thousands. We don't really know. But what enables us to identify them is the fact that they maintain their cultural practices and identities so distinct from other communities in the places where they migrated to, that even if they come in small groups, they are very, very visible in the archaeological record. I also mentioned this little jump that we have in the area of currently the state of Lebanon. And what happens here is that at this time, around 2900, the beginning of the early Bronze III, in the coast of Lebanon, we have very strong presence of Egyptians. So it's a very strong political and cultural presence. At the same time, in the Baqa region on the highlands of Lebanon, it's a swampy area. So it's not suited for settling down. So they basically jump over Lebanon and get to the southern Levant, where there is no strong political presence, because the first cities of the early Bronze II start changing, and they're not holding a strong unified entity as they were before. And therefore, it gives an opportunity for new people to enter. When we think about these people, it's not just that they migrated to other people, forget where they came from, and, you know, became assimilated with the local population. As I said, they maintain a very strong, distinct identity. And in that sense, I suggest we should look at them as a diaspora community and not just as migrants. And in that sense, I mean, diaspora is a social process of people who might move and spread from various reasons, and they cross different boundaries that might be geographical, political, cultural, linguistic, mental, but at the same time, they maintain the identity of where they came from, and some sort of relation or orientation towards this shared homeland. And this group identity is based, on the one hand, on solidarity and things that they take and bring with them from the places they arrive from. And at the same time, it's built on the distinction from other groups. These people don't forget where they come from. They are from one place, but they're also of other places. So this identity is built on maintaining what they bring, but also constructed through difference. At the same time, they do engage in some negotiation with the local community, and it's a give and take. But in the case of Kura-Araxes people, what we see is that we don't get to hybridity and assimilation so fast because they maintain, oops, wait a minute. They maintain their social practices and actually have a very tenacious, very persistent preservation of material culture, of practices that they bring with them. So what we see in the southern Levant, in the case of Khirbet Kerak specifically, is that they come in and settle either in places where villages were recently abandoned, or in the case of Tel Beit Yerach, they enter into a city that is still partly occupied, but they enter to the neighborhoods and houses that were recently abandoned. And we see it in different sites in the southern Levant, not just Tel Beit Yerach, but also in the northern Jordan Valley or central Jordan Valley, Tel Chatzor, Bet She'an, Tel Eshuna in Jordan, Afula, Kishion, and Yakush. Because at Tel Beit Yerach, they live within the local population, they come in more intensive relations and negotiations with the local population. And that really brings forward this tension between cultural retention and change on the one hand. But there are some things, as I said, that they are not letting go. And when we looked at Tel Beit Yerach, our understanding was that when we came back to work at the site, we said we are not assuming that because we have Khirbet Kerak where we have migration, we have to test it and prove it. And our understanding was that if these are in fact migrants, then we shouldn't find just the pottery, but we should look for an entire cultural package or cultural repertoire that goes with it. And then we started checking in the site, and we found out that there is an uneven spatial distribution of Khirbet Kerak ware versus other ceramic groups at the site. And then we saw that houses and households are different. There are differences in ceramic technology, not just the typology and how vessels looks. We see differences in food preparation, in consumption. We checked the botanical and zoological materials, and there are very strong differences there too, as well as in lithic technology, in macro stone tools, metal technologies and artifacts, symbolic items, and so on. So I'm going to present to you now some of these things as we saw them. Maybe I'll skip these two, and I'll go straight ahead to the area that actually we started excavating or came back to excavate. And this is area SA in the north part of Tel Beit Yerach. And this area was excavated in the 1940s. With the famous circles building that I'm going to talk about. And we actually came back to work here, and the areas that are colored on the right side are the areas that we reopened and continued to excavate during our seasons there. On the right, the areas that are in pink are the areas that we found abandoned Khirbet Kerak ware. On the left, we see in the yellow areas, places where at the same time, during the EB3, we find only local pottery, no Khirbet Kerak ware. What separates these areas? only this street, this paved street or alley. And you can see it also in the aerial photo. So we have the alley, and everything to the right is full of khirbet karak ware, and everything to the left is completely very strongly local. What we have to the right is the Circles building, which was a public building that they started building at the end of the early Bronze too, but was never finished and then abandoned. When the people, these migrants, came in the site, they actually occupied this building and repurposed it for their needs. And they also occupied the open space, the plaza that was in the north, to the north of the Circles building, while to the left of the street, the local neighborhood was still occupied by local people. So this is a reconstruction of this area and what it might have looked like in the early Bronze tree. This is the local neighborhood, and this is the abandoned public building and open plaza that were occupied by these khirbet karak people or migrants. When we look at the difference between these two areas, we see that in area SAS, to the left of the street, there is a strong continuity of local traditions in architecture, in pottery, and other finds, while in the plaza and Circles building, we find new evidence for the settlement of migrants. What are these evidence? For example, while the local buildings are properly built with stone foundations and mud bricks, in the khirbet karak ware areas, we found remains of wattle and dub structures and fixtures and fragments of burnished clay floors that are very close to Kura-Araxes houses in the Caucasus. We found this kiln in the Circles building that is built of wattle and daub with pillar made of khirbet karak ware stand. When we look at the pottery is different not only because of the way it looks, not only the shapes, not only the finish, the beautiful red and black burnished khirbet karak ware is all handmade and is much more diverse than the local pottery to the left, which is much more standardized and also used slow wheel to produce the vessels. The study of technology was done by Mark Isserlis, who did not only study the differences between local traditions and khirbet karak ware at Beit Yarach, but actually did a comparative study throughout the dispersal area of khirbet karak, of Kura-Araxes, from the Caucasus to Iran, and found these incredible affinities in the way people made this pottery from scratch, from the choice of raw materials to the shaping of the vessels, through their finishing and firing and decoration. And we tried to recreate this process of making khirbet karak vessels to some success. Turns out it's really, really difficult to do what they did so well. But we did try to use all the raw materials and tools that they had available and nothing more. Another thing that we see that is very different is the cooking and consumption, as I said, food preparation and consumption. So it's not only the vessels that were used to cook and eat. As you see here, we have cooking pots and lids, and then there are also the andirons or portable hearths that were used to put the pots on the hearth and cook. But also the serving dishes, deep, big craters, and small, beautiful serving bowls, personal serving bowls. And when we see what they ate, this is also different. So local people, we find these huge platters, flat platters, and then we also find in the EB3 these huge roasting pits. So basically, you can see down, these people loved barbecue. They loved asado. They loved roasting things. It's not that we don't have also cooking pots and stews in the local tradition, but they were very heavy on roasting meat. And when we look at the Khirbet Kerak assemblage, we found these deep cooking pots, these pot stands, and the serving dishes are also deep. And these people tended to eat mainly stews that are more liquid. When we wanted to see what they actually ate, we started sifting everything. We collected not only all the bones, but also all the botanical remains. We collected everything. We did some dry and wet sieving, and then picking many hours, even the tiniest seeds and grains and remains, to get to this wonderful picture. And this wonderful picture shows us that vegetal foods were completely different. So while the local population on the right-hand side had a more balanced traditional Mediterranean diet, so to speak, the KKW, the Khirbet Kerak people, were heavily based on carbs. They ate a lot of cereals, mainly wheat and barley, and very little legumes and fruits. And this is very similar to what we see actually in the Caucasus. Now, it's not only that they ate lots and lots of wheat and barley, but it's also what type of wheat that they ate. And in this case, we found that they used not only gloom wheat, used traditionally by local people in the southern Levant, but they also used free threshing wheat. Free threshing wheat is very typical in the South Caucasus. So that means that somebody brought a bag of grains with him from far north when they came to settle down here. And it's not because free threshing wheat grows better in the southern Levant, but it's because that's what they're used to eat. It has a higher gluten content. It's great for making stews. It's good for transporting. And it's basically what they have been using for many years. So keeping these traditions alive. When we look at the meat consumption, this is also different. It's not only that they use it for stews rather than roasting, but it's also what cuts they eat. And what Gwen Moore found out is that local people use the good cuts of the meat, while Khirbet Kerak people had access maybe only to lesser parts that are not as meaty. And they also tend to extract bone marrow from long bones much more than the local population. So this can be an issue, again, of slow cooking, of stews, of the culinary preferences, but it also might be an issue of limited access to some good commodities that the locals took to themselves. As I mentioned, we see also many differences in other categories of the material culture, from the small animal figurines that are different from the locals and look like what we have in the Caucasus, the miniature vessels that are basically miniature Khirbet Kerak ware, made to great precision, with great precision. We also find these wheel models, and wheel models are only found with the Khirbet Kerak ware and not with the local assemblages. And in the Caucasus, they are part of cart models that are very common in different Kura-Araxes sites. Differences are found also in the typology and composition of metal, as I will show. Flint production is also different. We see that locals have better access to high quality raw materials while Khirbet Kerak people basically collect pebbles from the shore of the lake. They also have little access to finished commodities, and they used a lot of secondhand artifacts. Same goes for ground stone tools. The big stone tools, very, very different from the local stone tools, also in the typology and in the raw materials, the quality of the raw material. Same goes for wood. When we look at the charcoal that we find that they basically used what they could put their hands on, and they had only partial access to good food and fuel resources that were available to the dominant population. And as for the metal artifacts that I mentioned, we find not only differences in typology, but also in the elemental composition and lead isotopes of copper-based artifacts, and showing that Khirbet Kerak have related artifacts have northern origins from the South Caucasus, while some of the local artifacts actually show that they come from possibly north or southern origins, southern Israel, copper mines. And then remains the question of why we find these differences. And Rafi Greenberg recently suggested that Khirbet Kerak people were actually marginalized on purpose, and that they were restricted by the local population, not getting access to all the good things that local people had access to. And that might very well be true. We know nowadays that some minority communities do not get equal opportunities and access to everything that local communities get. But I suggest also another view, and the other view is related to Kura-Araxes habitus in general. And when we look at how they do things also in the homeland, for example, in Kvatskelebi, the site that I study in Georgia, we see that they really don't bother to go far away to get better quality raw materials. They make flint tools and obsidian tools from pebbles and rocks that they bring from the river. They build their houses and make their pottery from soil that they have on site or in the immediate vicinity of the site. We see some local trade networks and very, very few wider trade networks, mainly for metal artifacts and some obsidian. So what I get when I look at the patterns in the South Caucasus is that this could be a matter of choice, of cultural practices, of habitus, and not just of imposed constraints by the hosting population. I would like to finish by taking for a minute a wider view of the Kura-Araxes cultural complex, because when we look at it, of course, as I said, there are a lot of things that are similar and are maintained through time and space when we compare them to the homeland, but then there are also some things that change, and there is some diversity. And then comes the question, what ties these things together? What gives me the possibility to talk about the people of Tel Beit Yerach and the people of Kvatskelebi as part of the same cultural complex? And for that, I recruited Wittgenstein's rope metaphor. And basically what it says is that when we make such a big rope like these people in Peru, we start with collecting weeds and making very small fibers, and then then slightly bigger threads, then making long but thin wires that become eventually tied together to become these very big and heavy ropes. And when you take this big and heavy rope, the fibers that you have on the one end and the ones that you have on the other end are different. They're not the same fibers, but they are part of the same big rope. And it's the way they're intertwined together that gives the rope the length and the strength that that characterizes it. And I think that might be a good way to look at this diaspora of Kura-Araxes people. The end of Kura-Araxes people arrives at around 2500 BC, maybe slightly before. And we see a change in settlement patterns. We see that the egalitarian villages are abandoned. We see higher mobility. We see the rise of local elites and huge, immense funerary monumental structures. And at the same time that this happens in the South Caucasus, Khirbet Kerakwer and other diasporic communities in the far ends of the dispersal also disappear. Why this happens is the million-dollar question that is beyond the scope of this talk today, but definitely something to continue thinking about. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Sarit. That was a fascinating lecture, and such a wonderful demonstration of how approaching an assemblage of archaeology can strengthen insights and strengthen interpretations. So thank you. I really enjoyed that. Do you mind stopping sharing your screen?
Oh, of course.
And then
Yeah.
there are a few questions coming in. There's a question about why do you think the Khirbet Kerak or the Caucasus culture stopped at that certain point in the southern Levant? Why didn't they continue to migrate further to the south?
I mean, I think basically they looked for a place where they can settle and continue doing their thing, which means, you know, agriculture and raising some animals and living their small, quiet life without, you know, they didn't have great aspirations of spreading and occupying space. They just, you know, wanted to find a place where they can continue doing their own thing. And when I go, you know, I sit and watch the sunrise on the Sea of Galilee, or when I sit and watch the sunrise over the Metkvari, the Kura River in Georgia, I mean, the landscape is quite similar, you know. It's like can be something that is reminding them, you know, is reminiscent of their homeland. But basically, I think, you know, once they have the conditions of what they need to continue doing their thing, then that's it. That's as simple as that.
So perhaps the regions further to the south were just too different, or that may have been.
I don't know. I mean, you know,
many
Israel is small. It's quite similar. We do find bits and pieces of Khirbet Kerakwer in other sites further south, but we do not find the entire package. So that, for me, that means that these people, you know, they walked around, they met other people, they explored other places, and they decided they don't need to move further around. They found their place.
Right. The limits of exploration or of
Yeah. Also because they avoided you know, this strong political entities. And maybe at that time, some cities like Tel Yarmout, with the palace and everything, seemed like a more dominant, political entities. Then they just stay away from that.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about. I'm forgetting like what was going on, for instance, in the area of Syria, modern day Syria, but that was contemporary, and where there's sort of similar avoidances of strong political centers,
Yeah,
while still migrating and taking advantage of regions of sort of weaker control, or that sort of thing.
yeah,
Um, your observations also from your work in Georgia were really fascinating. The idea that it was a kind of culture that was, while clearly moving so far afield from its center, still carried that sort of not quite isolationist, but kind of, it's almost like they were satisfied with things that were close to them.
yeah,
And that really feels to me like a kind of cultural trait, right? Um, just as another cultural trait is to maintain things like, the pottery, like, grandma
yeah,
used or whatever,
yeah,
and to pass on those traditions over generations as well.
yeah, definitely.
So I'm curious, because I noticed on your map with the greater regional sort of spread, there were sites that included or were marked specifically as burials. And I know this is relatively new kind of work, but has there been ancient DNA studies done on skeletal materials? Um,
Okay. So first of all, these maps with the distinction between burials and settlements, etc. This was made by Toby Wilkinson. Not going to get into details. So in the South Caucasus, we almost always have settlement and cemeteries very close by. So they buried right outside the settlement, and then it's very easy to include this in the discussion. So when I talk about Vatschelebi, I have also the burials as part of my assemblage, as my community. The dead are also part of the community in a way. And then we can study again similarities and differences in funerary practices. And then when we go further down south, we don't have burials. That's the thing. So in general, in the southern Levant, in the EB3, we don't have burials. We have some in maybe the other side of the Jordan. But basically, we have people. We have lots of burials in the early Bronze One, huge cemeteries, and then from the EB2, EB3 until we don't, Rafi Greenberg always said that people just didn't die at this point, and then 1,000 years later, we get to the intermediate bronze, and then they all die. So
that
clearly that's not
genetically
the case, but we just didn't find their burials. So we have no way to do this aDNA work. There is a lot of isotopic analysis on skeletons from the Caucasus. There are some aDNA studies on the go, I think. I tend to be very careful about it because I know it became very trendy to talk about migration of people based on aDNA. And I will say something that for me is very clear, but maybe not to everybody, that who you are, culture is defined by, the way you see yourself and the practices that you choose to take and the things that you choose to do. So this just the same way as American culture, if there is such a thing, have people of many different ethnicities, and I think it's very, very risky to talk about ADNA as the key for
Sure.
our story. And also because even people who do these studies admit that at some point during the Bronze Age, things are mixed so much because people have already moved around so much that we cannot be as decisive as we are maybe when we talk about Neolithic Europe, So, so I'm careful about it, and I'm kind of happy that we don't have skeletal remains at Tel Beit Yerach, because that made us do the hard work of like old-fashioned, old school, traditional way of going to material culture.
Sure,
So.
but new school in the sense that, I mean, you can't compare it with the 1950s, of course, but
Oh no, definitely. I mean, because we do have all these new, scientific tools that we can
sure.
use, and yeah.
But even, collecting the data the way that you did and
Yeah.
thinking about it the ways that you did.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful example of how, things that in the past may have been either ignored or put in appendices, like, the zooarchaeology or the botanical remains, can give us such important insights, especially when I'm a big fan of, thinking about the assemblage, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where I would see the importance of, if it existed, of ADNA data, just as another addition to the assemblage.
Yeah.
But of course, in this case, it's an argument from silence because we don't have the burials.
Yeah.
Um, but I do appreciate the other thing, and I think this is changing as well. But this notion that, we can test, just a handful of skeletons and make sweeping, generalizations about movement of
Exactly.
people or about their identities.
Mm.
It needs to be corrected. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's sums up the questions that have been coming in. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank you again for such an amazing presentation. And did you want to make some comments about the situation?
If that's okay.
Absolutely. So the floor
Yeah.
is yours for that as well.
So, in the past 24 hours, we had some very upsetting events in Israel, in Israeli archaeology, to be more specific. The Israeli the annual Congress of Archaeology in Israel was supposed to take place today, with dozens of speakers and hundreds of participants. And just yesterday, the Minister of Heritage, an extreme right minister, made a very blunt political intervention or attempt to intervene, as he ordered the organizers of the committee, and more specifically the Israeli Antiquities Authority, who was supposed to host the conference, to remove one of the speakers, as it may be Rafi Greenberg, who is director of the Tel Beit Yerach project and my mentor and close friend. I am happy to say that the organizing committee has decided not to cave in to this blunt political pressure, and instead decided to postpone the conference and hold it in a different time and place. I think in these very, very complicated times where academic freedom is in danger, both in Israel and in the United States, we have to stand together and I'm proud of my colleagues who chose solidarity and integrity and to stand against this very, very disturbing occurrence. And we don't know where this is heading, but at least for now, I hope we will be able to stop this very slippery slope. Thank you for allowing me to.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that with our audience. And on that note, again, I would like to shout out to Dr. Paz for a wonderful presentation in this year's series, and also draw attention to our audience that 2 weeks from today, on April 17th, also at 9:30 a.m. California time, or wherever that is equated to, wherever you are in the world, Dr. Jana Mokrashova of Cambridge University will be doing a presentation entitled Shifting Boundaries, Moving People, Investigating Change in Archaic Western Anatolia. So do stay tuned. So we'll move from the third millennium down to the first millennium. And I hope you're able to join us then or later online.